This Gouging Fire team has a whopping 73% win rate in recent tournaments. Now, the sample pool is a little bit small, so the numbers might be a tad bit inflated, but obviously the team is doing something correct if it's sitting at a 73% win rate. You know, you don't just pull up with like 6 garbage Pokemon and win and have a 73% win rate. It just doesn't happen. Okay, so the team is incredibly cool and obviously has a lot of good things going for it as well. Today we're going to feature that and showcase this team as we go over it. So we've got Gouging Fire, Flutter Mane, Ogerpon-Wellspring, Kingambit, Landorus, and Chien-Pao. We'll start with why everybody is here, and that is Gouging Fire. We'll go over some example spreads for the full team in a bit, because obviously these full pace has not been released, but I really did want to feature the team because it is a really cool looking team. Maybe it's just because I saw Kingambit and I was like, yo, Kingambit is heat, but don't worry about it. Speaking of heat, we have Heat Crash on Gouging Fire. Now there is a fairly decent sized argument as to whether you should be running Heat Crash or you should be running Flare Blitz. I personally like Heat Crash a whole lot more. Not being able to get hit by recoil damage is really strong. You are one of the top 10 heaviest Pokemon in the format, so more often than not you are just going to be launching out big damage with this Pokemon, so you're going to go Heat Crash. Dragon Dance, they opted for Dragon Dance, which is really cool. Just get that setup going, you know, get that +1 attack, get that +1 speed, and of course your stats cannot get dropped. So anything like Icy Wind, Intimidate is the big one there. You're not going to get brought back down in your speed. You have the setup option, and you're going to take advantage of that in its fullest, you know? And then of course Dragon Claw to round out the moveset. I'm a big fan of as well as Breaking Swipe here instead of Dragon Claw. Just some spread damage. +1 Breaking Swipes do a lot of damage. We've seen Roaring Moon have that Breaking Swipe. I'm very curious to see if that could be an adaptation here, but of course they had Dragon Claw. Big dragon damage is never a bad idea to have. You know, there's not a whole lot of things that actually resist that. And then of course the new signature Protect of Gouging Fire, which is Burning Bulwark, and if you attack this with physical contact, you are going to get burned, which is incredible. However, the downside is it is not a full Protect. Status moves will still go through it. So if I go Burning Bulwark and they Spore me, I will be able to fall asleep. So it's a little bit unfortunate there. It's a rather big drawback for not having Protect, but I think as a whole, having this move is incredibly strong, and having it is way better than just having Protect. But I like Heat Crash a lot better. It's a lot more consistent than Flare Blitz. Going back to that, I don't know if I ever finished my point, right? Like I said, you're one of the top 10 heaviest Pokemon in the format. Doing big damage to everything that you're really trying to hit just feels so much better than Flare Blitz maybe doing a little bit more damage consistently, but you're also doing damage consistently to yourself, which just doesn't feel good to me. I think Heat Crash is the right option on this variant. Of course, then you pair this Gouging Fire, and we're going to go straight over to Chien-Pao, because Chien-Pao and Entei is a really strong core. Now, of course, this is a Gouging Fire, so it does function a tad bit differently, but with the Clear Amulet, similar to Entei, you cannot get intimidated. Chien-Pao is boosting the Gouging Fire's attacks. The Fire type attacks go into those Steel types that give Chien-Pao a problem. The Ground types that would give Gouging Fire a problem, Chien-Pao is capable of dealing with. There's a lot of options. The synergy between Gouging Fire or Entei and Chien-Pao is incredibly strong. And then you just have your standard Chien-Pao, you know, Terra Ghost so you can't get faked out, Ice Spinner, Sacred Sword, Sucker Punch, Protect. Alright, that's just your standard Chien-Pao. It's doing its thing. It's a gamer. Chien-Pao is going to be good. Moving on, we'll go over to Landorus, because this team really, when you have a fire type that's not Incineroar, my immediate next thought is, where's the Intimidate on the team? Because Intimidate is such a vital piece and a vital way to play around your opponent's strategies, especially in a physically dominated format. So I immediately go, where's my Intimidate? And in this case, they opted for Landorus-Therian, which I think is incredibly strong. And we've seen Landorus-Therian be the king of VGC in the past. It is still an incredibly strong piece. Now, everybody's using the whole new flavor of the month in the Landorus Incarnate, right? And rightfully so. Landorus Incarnate is an incredible wall breaker, does incredible amounts of damage, can't get Intimidate, has a lot of good things going for it. But Landorus-Therian is nothing to be slept on. I think the Pokemon is still incredibly strong, but people are kind of falling off of it for, I don't really know what reason. I guess Incineroar is now your Intimidate piece, and then you can bring Landorus Eye, which deals with Incineroar better. A lot of reasons for that, but Landorus-Therian is still incredibly strong. You've just got your basic Choice Scarf stat here, right? Stomp and Tantrum, Rock Slide, U-Turn, Terra Blast. Allows you to do big damage beside the Chien-Pao. Allows you to put on immediate pressure if they don't have speed control. Just really strong all around. And then when you have ground type offensively, it's very nice to have a fairy type offensively as well, because they cannot resist both. We've been over this in previous videos where if you are going to resist Fairy, you are going to be weak to ground, barring any sort of dual typing or anything like that. So the synergy there is incredibly, incredibly strong as well. Not only are you putting out Intimidates so that Flutter Mane takes less damage on its frailer defensive stats, you also then pair it with, oh, you're going to resist Flutter Mane? Well, no, I'm just going to hit you with a Stomping Tantrum now and we're going to move on. So the synergy there is incredible. Flutter Mane, I'm not sold on Icy Wind. I think it is a really strong option, but being specs locked into Icy Wind just doesn't feel great. Booster speed Icy Wind, in my opinion, is a lot better because then I can just switch off of the Icy Wind, right? Like, oh, Icy Wind didn't work out for me. That's fine because they switched it up. They switched their position. I can just switch over to my Moonblast or my Dazzling Gleam the next turn. However, on specs, I'm locked into that Icy Wind. It just doesn't feel as consistent. However, it is a very good fourth move on Flutter Mane. You could sit here and talk about 92 other moves for fourth move Flutter Mane, but the fact of the matter is you are clicking the top 3 more often than not. So maybe they thought Icy Wind helped them, gave them that ability to, maybe click that Icy Wind and allow Gouging Fire to do some big damage. Right, then you close this out with probably the most balancy piece on this team, which is Ogerpon-Wellspring. And this is just your typical Ogerpon, guys. Nothing to see here. Ivy Cudgel, Hornleech, Follow Me, Spiky Shield. Supporting that rest of the team. Closing off the Fire, Water, Grass core in one Pokemon. And I don't like talking about cores, but once again, you've got that Fire, Water, Grass core. You've got the Dragon Fairy Steel core. And then you pair it off with just really good pieces of like ground flying and dark ice. Like, if you're looking at type synergies and that's how you're building your team, this is very well built if you're looking at exactly that. Right, there are some things I do have issues with about this team, and we'll get into that in a minute. I'll probably do some example spreads for you guys first. But Ogerpon, incredibly solid. Just support the rest of the team, get some Follow Me's up. You can go Follow Me, set up a Dragon Dance, which I think is really, really cool. And then, of course, you also have just the redirection of Urshifu, which is super important, because if you look at this team immediately, Urshifu is a little bit spooky. So I think Ogerpon is a must-have on this team. I really like the way it was built. And then, of course, you have your Terra Blast, Terra Fairy, Assault Vest, Kingambit. Now, this has been picking back up in usage. We've seen a lot of Kingambits in the past few months. Just switch over to that Black Glasses setup variant. However, in this format, it feels like you want to have Kingambit be capable of taking a hit from Flutter Mane and then killing a Flutter Mane back. Being able to stick on the field a tad bit longer rather than just go, oh, Swords Dance, and then just try to sweep the team. It feels a little bit more valuable to have this Assault Vest, be able to sit on the field a little bit longer and just do some damage. Assurance is a really, really cool option, especially when you're beside something like Rock Slide Lando, Icy Wind, or Dazzling Gleam from the Flutter Mane, right? You can get a lot of cool double ups where you can go for stuff like that, and I think that's incredibly cool to see here, right? Then you just close it out with your Sucker Punch, Iron Head, and Terra Blast. I think Low Kick has something to be said for it as well, but I don't think you need it because you have Sacred Sword over on Chien-Pao for other Kingambits. You also have the Fire-type move over here for other Kingambits as well. You have a lot of options into Kingambit anyway, so you can afford Terra Blast here, which is just going to hit those fighting types right back and basically flip the damage chart. Like Urshifu wants to sit there in front of you. It can no longer do that because you could go Terra Fairy, Terra Blast. Regardless, the team itself is incredible. It looks really, really strong. I'm looking forward to trying this one out myself. However, we're going to jump into some example spreads for you guys that I've put together. Really quick disclaimer, guys. The team has not officially been revealed. This is me just throwing spreads in as a starting point for you guys to maybe try out at home. So you're tons of room to play. I could be very wrong on what all of these spreads do, but I'll go over my thought process with them just so you guys can have an idea as to what I'm trying to accomplish with these spreads. Anyways, Gouging Fire, there's a lot of options. I see Dragon Dance here, and my immediate thought is I want to send damage. Now, you don't necessarily need to be 143. But 143 at +1 speed ties max speed Adamant Jolly Scarflander. Max speed Adamant Scarflanders. So maybe you don't really need to hit 143. Maybe you can go a little bit lower. I believe it's 139 is the lowest you can go as long as if you want to outpace Flutter Mane at +1. Right, and I think that's definitely the biggest point. I would not go slower than this. If I'm taking the time to get a Dragon Dance off, I want to be outpacing the Flutter Manes after that. I want to make sure I'm faster than that Flutter Mane and get it off the field next turn. There is no reason I would ever want to be slower than this, in my opinion, on a Dragon Dance Gouging Fire variant. You could perhaps as well go Jolly as well. I consider Jolly because you are beside Chien-Pao, so the damage output you lose from the Adamant, you would make back up by having a Chien-Pao beside you, but that's not always going to be the case, so I sent it like this for now. I couldn't find any we want to bulk this out. Any reasons to really bulk this out. Obviously, you got a lot of good things going for you maybe you can drop this down to like a 220, and maybe a little bit of bulk into special defense actually helps you out a little bit. Obviously, I don't know. I didn't see anything immediately that caught my eye when I was looking at the spread, so I just kind of sent 252, 252, send Dragon Dances, go from there. Flutter Mane, guys, you can use any old Flutter Mane spread that you have with you here. What I would say, the only one thing I want to talk about with Flutter Mane is I don't know how common Iron Boulder is going to be. I could definitely see Iron Boulder becoming a thing, because at the end of the day, it hits through Protect, and that is inherently good. Being able to attack through Protect is good, right? So I wouldn't go lower than 193. 193 would be speed tying Iron Boulder. So if you are going to drop your Flutter Mane, I would imagine you want to sit around 172. Make sure you are faster than that Iron Boulder. However, this is just a Flutter Mane spread that I've been like, this has been my first Flutter Mane spread that I toss onto things, you know? I'm looking for a fast specs Flutter Mane. This is what I end up tossing in. Once again, though, any Flutter Mane spread here, probably going to get the job done, no problem. No problems, you know? Just, you could probably almost go max speed, especially if you are going specs Icy Wind. That would guarantee you, you know what I mean? You maybe drop your bulk a little bit, and then you guarantee yourself that you're going to be faster than all the other Flutter Manes. And you can go for something like an Icy Wind into a Heat Crash, you know, and just pick off the Flutter Manes, you know, Icy Wind into an Ivy Cudgel. You know, you can take advantage of that a lot. Right? Now, obviously, I don't know if that's a spread that I would fully recommend, but that is a cool option that you could potentially go after if you were looking for something like that. Now, the Ogerpon, I am a big believer in 252 HP, 100 defense on Ogerpon-Wellspring. This is what I would normally recommend on every team if you're just going to slap an Ogerpon on this team. However, when I look at this team, Landorus Incarnate scares me. Landorus Incarnate scares me so much that I want to change this variant from going from that, and I want to put this speed. I want to be sitting at 169. I want to be outpacing this Lando. Because if this Landorus is on the field, it is able to kill my Kingambit, it is able to kill my Gouging Fire. Flutter Mane cannot one-shot it. Landorus can wall it out, but it can't really do much back. Obviously, Rock Slide over time will add up, but versus a Landorus Incarnate, you don't have overtime, right? You need to get some damage output onto it immediately. So I really think this Ogerpon benefits from being fast in that. Obviously, you do have the Chien-Pao that will outpace the Lando, right? So maybe you can go back and just say, hey, I don't need this. I can just go back to the bulk that I like so much, right? And you could go bulky again. But something about me, my first instincts on this team says, hey, I really want to have that extra piece that can be faster than that Landorus Eye. And just having a fast Ogerpon, being guaranteed to be faster than all those Urshifus as well is never really a bad thing, right? So I don't hate this spread, but I do think having I might miss the bulk. I'm so used to having the bulk, especially versus like the Dragonite Chien-Pao stuff, where like 252, 100 would just allow you to live the Bandit E-Speed, force them into you twice, and allow your Flutter Mane to do some big damage. It's something to consider, but it's a trade-off, right? And I think it's almost a necessary trade-off in this case. I think having the speed on Ogerpon on this team to be able to outpace that Lando Eye is a really, really cool concept, and it's definitely something to look into. Now, it may not work out in practice, but in theory, I think that's a really strong concept on the speed for Ogerpon. But most certainly, as a starting point, you can probably just say, hey, any old Ogerpon is probably going to work out just as well. Kingambit Assault Vest set. Not a lot to talk about here, guys. You can take pretty much any Assault Vest set. You know, you're looking at your attack bump here with 196. You can probably drop HP a little bit to invest in special defense. Because with Assurance, you want to be having at least a decent amount of attack, especially if you're pairing it with Icy Wind Assurance, right? So you probably want to go flip the script here and go down to 4. Get back up to maybe like 77 or the 78, maybe even faster. I don't know how fast you'd really necessarily want to run, right? But you can find some things that are cool, you know? It's like, oh, I can go Icy Wind into Assurance and pick up some KOs. There are options for you to do that, right? If you want to maybe increase your speed, lower your stat over here. Right now, I don't know if 80 is really a good spot to sit, right? Maybe you do just go back down to, maybe you only need 74, right? Whatever you end up deciding, that's completely fair. But as a base spread, you can probably just throw something like this in, and it is going to be a really strong option to start. It's a very strong starting point. There's tons of room to play with like the Icy Wind Assurance stuff to take advantage of that speed. So I would look into that if you are playing with this team and trying to utilize this team. That is definitely a spot I would look. The Landorus, guys, there's nothing to say here. it's Landorus, you're going to click Tantrum, Rock Slide 92% of the time. Switch it up with a Terra Blast to do some big damage. And I just sent Max Adamant. You can afford to maybe drop some attack, go down to 196 and get that. That's the second bump, right? So you get the bump there, and then you can put some bulk in. Maybe patch up some of like those Flutter Mane Moonblast rolls. Maybe patch up like some Aqua Jet stuff, right? You could definitely do this, no problem. However, just for the basics of trying out this team, I think Max Adamant. You could also switch to Max Jolly, right? Which is definitely going to be something that would allow you, and I would consider, if you do decide to go with max speed on your Gouging Fire, when you get the +1, you don't really want to be speed tying Landorus. So I would recommend, if you are max speed Adamant Gouging Fire, I would recommend maybe a Jolly here, or just dropping this by 1 point perhaps. But the main reason for that would be because you want to be able to script out your turns. You want to make sure that, yep, okay, my Landorus picks off this piece, then my Gouging Fire picks off this piece, or one way or the other way around, so to speak, right? You don't want to be in a spot where you're like, oh, I need Lando to pick off this piece, and I need Gouging Fire to pick off this piece. But if my one piece just happens to be slower this time, it's not gonna really work. You can't really make safe double ups because you don't know which piece is gonna move first. So knowing which piece is gonna move first, whether that's dropping this to 142, whether that's raising this to Jolly or dropping this to 142, right? Being able to know which of your pieces is moving first constantly is incredibly strong. That's the one thing I did want to point out here. But otherwise, just you can send 252 here probably. The bulk doesn't add all that much, but you can probably find a spot if you wanted to go down over here and just bulk it up a little bit more, but I don't think you necessarily need it. And then, guys, there's Chien-Pao here. There's nothing really to talk about. This is your standard Chien-Pao. Our Ice Spinner is going to get rid of terrain. I sent 252 Adamant. I am a big believer in Adamant Chien-Pao. I used to love Jolly. I would be like, yo, Jolly Chien-Pao is heat. It allows me to go faster than everything. I'm outpacing Flutter Manes, which is exactly what I want. But you miss out on so many damage calcs that I think, especially running Ice Spinner over Crash, I think you definitely want to go Adamant on this variant with this Chien-Pao. I have two issues with this team. I have two issues. One, the lack of speed control. It seems incredibly difficult to match up versus like those dedicated hyper offensive teams that are just going to walk in and click Tailwind into you. It feels like your matchup is pretty spooky. I mean, obviously you do have priority, right? You have double Sucker Punch to get around that. You can redirect the Urshifu stuff, so it's not like it's like unwinnable, but it's definitely something I would maybe consider looking at with this team and say, hey, can I fix this? Am I that scared of speed control that it's needed to be fixed? That's the other thing. That's the main thing that I wanted to point out. And then the other one's more of a nitpicking thing. Like, I'm not really too concerned about it. Terra type Ghost, I would definitely explore Terra type Stellar. I think Stellar Terra Chien-Pao is incredibly strong. However, Ghost has its usage of not being able to get faked out. So maybe if they're trying to go like fake out Trick Room, you're able to go Terra Ghost with beside Flutter Mane, and they actually can't fake you out, and you're gonna get your double up successfully to kill the Trick Room setter. So that is something where Ghost is definitely on an advantage there. But Terra type Stellar, just that extra bit of damage, being able to pick off those Flutter Manes that don't expect you to get the kill. Sucker Punch at Terra, they have to invest incredible amounts of bulk to live Terra Stellar Sucker Punch. Unless they're, obviously they could Terra and just live it. But if they can't Terra, you Terra Stellar Sucker Punch, the Flutter Mane is just dead. And that is incredibly strong. Right, so Terra Stellar is definitely something to explore here if you're looking for it. I'm not sold on Terra Grass here either. I also want to talk about Howl. I think Grass is fine. Grass is definitely solid. Like I said, you don't want to really get put to sleep. You don't want to be redirected. I respect it. I think it's a strong option. I feel like Water is another cool option as well, just because I don't really want to be weak to Bleak Windstorms. I'm already weak. Like, Torn is already a spooky piece for this team to go up against by the looks of things just immediately. Right? Like, I'm scared of Tailwind going up, and I'm scared of the partners beside Tailwind. Right? I can't cover both, so having a different Terra here might allow me to maybe ignore Torn a little bit more, a little bit easier, and deal with the rest of the team before I have to deal with the Torn, right? It's a small thing. I think Grass is probably still optimal, but there are options for like Water to come around here. And I think something that's not being talked about, I already mentioned it earlier, which was Breaking Swipe on Gouging Fire. I would look into that a lot because I think getting Dragon Dance up, being at +1 and just dropping Breaking Swipes, not only are you doing good chunks of damage, you are also hindering their physical attackers at the same time. I think it's a very strong piece. You also have to consider the likes of Howl. Now, I think if you're going to go Howl, you do not run Howl on a Dragon Dance set. So I'm not going to discuss it too much here because this team obviously has opted for the Dragon Dance. Now, if you wanted to switch, I cannot type. right? If you wanted to switch to a Howl set, maybe you could try to do something like maybe like a booster speed option on the Gouging Fire, and then you'd be faster than potentially your Landorus and potentially your and your Chien-Pao guaranteed, right? Depending on how you want to script it. And you could walk in, you could click Howl on the turn 1, and then you'll have a +1 Chien-Pao. You'll have the +1 Landorus, right? I think that's something to look into on Gouging Fire, especially on a team where you don't actually have the fake out option. Because not having fake out is my second biggest point here, is that I don't like about the team, you know? Fake out just gives you that element. Sometimes it gives you that extra turn, especially when you have Dragon Dance. It gives you that turn to switch into fake out Dragon Dance, and they can't really do much about it, right? It's that extra element that I would have liked to have on this team. Obviously, you can't have it all. Team is incredibly, incredibly well built. But that's just going to about do it for me, guys. This is one of the coolest teams I've seen in Regulation F. If you guys do enjoy these types of videos, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help with the channel. And, of course, I really do appreciate it. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here. I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all in a future video.